شده هستید و یا ممکنه که دارید احساس خطر میکنید، مغز شما در آن واحد یک سری کمیکال ها میفرسته که تقریبا همونقدر تأثیر ممکنه داشته باشه و وقتی که زندگی شما زیر استرس هست همونقدر مغز شما توی استرس داره میره. حالا معمولا وقتی که ما فکر میکنیم که یک چیزی داریم میگیریم، یک چیز مثبتی داریم میگیریم، معمولا نگاه میکنیم به رفتارهامون و میگیم این رفتارهای ما امکان نداره که چیز مثبتی به ما بده، در حالی که در مغز ما این بیوشیمی داره میریزه و داره یک مقدار به ما اون فضا رو میده که ازش داریم لذت میبریم بدون اینی که بدونیم. و هر چقدر که آگاه میشیم به این مسئله که یک مقدار زیادی مغز ما رو داره به اون طرف میبره، اونجاست که میتونیم در حقیقت درخواست بکنیم از خودمون و رفتارهای دیگه‌ای رو جایگزین بکنیم برای اون مسئله. اگه سلاید بعدی رو بتونیم داشته باشیم میتونیم که thank you. مرسی.
All right, so what this is sort of excuse me, this is sort of a summary of how we look at the way kind of the human psyche. And this human psyche is split between these two forces, sort of these two magnetic poles. And the main pole, which you can sort of see as being at the center of the psyche, comes from the true self. And so I don't think I said this before, but but a key part of the model is that the true self is ultimately driven by homeostasis, by wanting to be in homeostasis, the drive to homeostasis. So sort of the highest manifestation of that is the true self. And so in other words, if a person only lives out of the homeostatic drive and is always trying their best to be in homeostasis, to be in psychological and physical balance, then they'll be living purely out of the true self. And so there are all these payoffs you can get from homeostatic states, from healthy things like love and emotional, social connection, play, flow, just this feeling of being completely absorbed in what you're doing. And so those are healthy payoffs. And that's where you really want to be. But then on the other sort of the dysfunctional part of the psyche are payoffs that come from, for instance, excessive craving, which also drives the stress response and also creates biochemical rewards like craving for food or for sex or unnecessary
potato chips,
right, or unnecessary anxiety, anger. And so there are these two opposing poles in the psyche. And what we're trying to do is to strengthen that pull from the true self, and by breaking down these neural networks that serve the false self, that serve the addiction persona.
Todd?
Yeah, I think the same thing that John was saying, that the theory provides an opportunity for the therapy. Again, when these are pretty abstract concepts, but when somebody really understands this concept, that there literally is a component in their brain, or you could say a separate psyche, or almost like a multiple personality disorder, and that the things that I've done throughout my life that maybe I'm not so proud of, I don't have to feel necessarily and hang on to the shame and say that that's who I am. Todd, maybe I'm just this type of person. I try to manipulate people, or I like to feel powerful, or whatever. And what we would say is that when you can identify that is all coming from the false self, that it really is driven by addiction, it's driven by a biochemical process, that it ultimately isn't you. And again, I think the beautiful part of the model is that as we keep identifying aspects of the false self or the addiction persona, or identifying these other addictions or alters, it's almost equivalent then to helping somebody find out who they really are by defining who they are not. And in terms of therapy, can also be very powerful also. Sometimes just by me saying something like, that's not me, or I see you, or that's no longer my story, and actually having a false self to attribute that to, that seems to have some sort of intention, which is just getting a drug payoff. Again, it sort of diminishes the sort of insidious nature of this demonic voice sometimes that people perceive in their head. And again, it's just a beautiful way, a very powerful way of helping people discover who they are and set themselves free from that voice and that behavior that's driven from the past and from their addictions.
And it's amazing. I mean, it really is that clear that these addiction-driven dynamics are just not who people are. There's never, they're not real. It's an illusion. And so it's an amazing thing to watch this process, both in yourself and in others, just to see how clear it is that people just become more like them. They become more themselves, the more addiction you can overcome.
وقتی که داشتن نگاه میکنیم به اون اسلاید به خصوص میگفتن که ما تقسیم میکنیم به اینی که یک قسمت ما انگار خود واقعی ماست و قسمت های دیگه رو میتونیم تشخیص بدیم به عنوان خود مجازی. وقتی که این قسمت های مختلف خودمون رو از هم جدا میکنیم میبینیم خود واقعی اونجاییه که مکررن در فضای تعادل هست و در جایگاهیه که رفتارهایی رو داره که به نفع ماست و این نفعی که داریم میگیم به طرف سلامت ماست، در حالی که خود مجازی یک کارهایی داره انجام میده که به نظر میاد به نفع و به نظر میاد یک فایده هایی هست، ولی اون فایده ها در عمل به زیان ما، در حقیقت به طرف زیان ما میره. و داشتیم نگاه میکردیم که ممکنه این قسمت هایی هست که از بازی، از لذت، از کیف های ما میتونیم بکنیم لذت هایی در وجود داره که وقتی در اون شرایط هستیم همه وجود ما، همه رفتارهای ما، همه روابط ما با بقیه یک فضای هم آرامش، هم خوش و شادی رو به وجود میاره، در حالی که ممکنه رفتارهای دیگه داشته باشیم که شاید برای ما یک سری فایده ها داشته باشه، ولی در عمل وقتی که میگذاریم میبینیم نه در رابطه با خودمون و نه در رابطه با بقیه فایده نداره و بلکه حتی زیان آوره. وقتی این دوتا رو از هم تشخیص میدیم، اون شاید شرم، احساس گناه، ناراحتی که از قسمت‌ها و رفتارهای خودمون برای خودمون به وجود میاد و شاید خودمون رو بد میدونیم رو میتونیم کنار بگذاریم و برگردیم به اون خود واقعی خودمون که میتونه رفتارهای سالم رو داشته باشه و ما رو جلو ببره در حقیقت. And I know that, almost 55 minutes of this conversation is definitely not sufficient enough for people to capture the model and get what the model is saying, because it's a very, although simple but also complex, theoretical model. It's the simplicity of it. I think it's because it resonates with us, but it's also very complex from a scientific place and from a psychological perspective, very, very complex. But again, it sounds simple because it's just, we've all experienced it. So it kind of like, oh yeah, that's where the simplicity of it comes in. But so I invite everyone to come to the 3.5 hour workshop, which will explain more of the model, and John will explain more of the neuroscientific aspect of the theoretical model. Todd will explain more from the relational aspect and how from the addictive mind and how the interventions and therapeutic aspects of those, it kind of lays the foundation and create the new behaviors. And I will talk from the cultural and the family aspect of how as we're growing up in a certain kind of a conversation and growing up in a sense of a particular way of experiencing the world and feeling like you're living in a family that is constantly angry or agitated, or some people have been born and raised in immigration processes, which is very, very traumatic, or people have been especially in Iran at times they were in the war, or different aspects of where you've been raised in an environment where there's a certain emotion which is the cornerstone of life. So I could see where our brain is completely hooked to that level of emotion. Absolutely. And so we'll talk about also the cultural background of what are the comments and messages that we get from the world, which also hooks us within these kind of neural networks that you were talking about. So May 16th, Sunday, 12:30 to 4 o'clock, UCLA Ackerman Lounge, which is on the 2nd floor. You come on Westwood, for those of you who are coming, which are in Los Angeles, listen well, Westwood Boulevard, you go all the way to parking number 6, you park, you come out, and the first building on your right-hand side is actually Ackerman Building, which is the bookstore, UCLA bookstore. If you forget anything, just ask for the bookstore. You come into the bookstore, you take the elevator, 2nd floor, Ackerman 2nd floor lounge. It's called Ackerman Lounge, 2nd floor lounge. We would love to see you. Please be there at 12:30. I know Persian time is You know, kind of like Hawaiian time, but we really request for you to be there at 12:30 to 4 o'clock. The seminar is free. The book